How's it going, guys? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiegue, welcoming you into a new episode of this program. I have a lot of news stories with you guys here today regarding some things related to the Combine, or the Pro Day, I should say, with Marvin Harrison actually not deciding to attend his Pro Day yesterday. I'll get into all of that. Plus, the new docuseries, or I guess concluded docuseries on the New England Patriots called The Dynasty. That finished up about 6 days ago, and I'm going to be talking about that and how some of the former players, Rodney Harrison and Devin McCourty, weren't such big fans of how it portrayed the team and all of that, legacy and storyline. I'll start off with that, and then later on in the show, I'll talk about the comments RG3 made about Caleb Williams towards the beginning of this week and, saying how he shouldn't be drafted by the Bears, how he should tell the Bears that he doesn't want to be drafted there. It's been a few days, but I haven't really given my opinion on it, so I'll be doing that. And wrap it all up, I'll be talking about the Cowboys and Stephen Jones and him giving some sort of reason why he hasn't, or I should say the Cowboys haven't been so active in free agency and why they haven't made any moves like all their fans and people in the media expected them to. All of that coming up on today's show. And before I jump into the chip shot story, I wanted to remind you guys, as I always do, if you have any questions, any comments that you want to leave me during this live show, to please use the tip and donations link at gsmcpodcast.net. Let's just make sure I'm able to see your question pop up here to my right on the chat box, and I just think it makes it more fun having a conversation potentially, or just answering any of your questions that you guys may have. So again, the tip and donations link is gsmcpodcast.net. It's always a big help for this show and all the shows across the network. We always appreciate it greatly anytime anyone who's watching is able to do that. Going back now to the first segment, the chip shot story, as always, I'll dive into that topic I had about the New England Patriots and the docuseries that came out this year. It actually dropped on February 16th this year, and I think they had a show come out every 2 weeks, if I'm not mistaken, leading up to the conclusion that finished up on March 15th. So it just ended recently, about like a week ago, really, and it basically followed all the journey, the legacy, talking about the Patriots and how they went from, an organization that really didn't know too much success before the arrivals of Bill Belichick, Tom Brady, and you know how the story goes, right? They basically recapped all of that, and I think a lot of people were expecting this, anticipating this to come out, because like I mentioned yesterday with Netflix and them capturing stories or seasons, it's always interesting for people to go behind the scenes and learn more than what they see on TV or in interviews. And the way that this was portrayed, I think people had an expectation of what it would be like, and I think a lot of people were left a little bit disappointed with the result, specifically to former players Devin McCourty and Rodney Harrison. They were actually part of the docuseries. They answered questions, gave their insight, some stories as well. And after they were released from, all their duties they did with production, they were able to see the whole thing in its totality, and they were left pretty unsatisfied. They actually talked about it, I think, a few days ago now. Devin McCourty obviously being part of NBC and being always on air talking about football. Rodney Harrison as well. They talked about it, I think, through NBC when they were asked to talk about it on a feature piece. They had some pretty choice words to say about it. Rodney Harrison started it off by saying, "It just seemed so Tom and Bill centric and Kraft. I didn't enjoy it. I stopped because it didn't tell the stories. It was centered around some things that I really wasn't feeling." And he went on to say that he actually interviewed for 5 to 6 hours in New York, and he just felt that that he had good input to tell on Tom Brady and the organization and his journey to actually getting to be part of that team with the New England Patriots, how Bill Belichick kind of took a chance on him, and made him part of the team, but that really wasn't the focus of what they had him do or what they showed in the final product. And he thought that they were going to use it. They probably asked him about him. He felt that he was kind of led on, and they actually didn't show any of that stuff that he felt was the best bits and pieces of his experience with the Patriots and what he thought he could have contributed the most to this program. And then you had Devin McCourty sort of answering him, agreeing with him in his sentiment. The same thing with McCourty. He agreed that he also recorded or interviewed with the production team in New York for 4 to 5 hours, and then another 2 to 3 hours in Massachusetts as well. So a lot of work went into this for these two guys in terms of preparation, production, and getting it looking right and sounding right. And they were left dissatisfied with that. Devin McCourty went on a little bit further to talk a bit more specifically about his experience with it, and he said, "I feel like I got kind of duped. Only things I said that could come across as negative to Bill was the only thing used. ... That everything that we all gave to the 20 years that it encompassed, they only hit anything that was negative." And basically referring to the part of that interview, referring to the part in the docuseries where Bill Belichick actually sent a letter to Donald Trump back in 2016 in support of his candidacy for the presidency of the United States. And, Devin wasn't a fan of that. He spoke about it. I'm sure the production team, the directors, or whoever asked him about that and how he felt about it. Obviously, if he disagreed with Bill and wasn't a fan of Donald Trump, that dichotomy, that answer he gave wasn't a glowing review of Bill Belichick or his actions in supporting Donald Trump, but that's the direction that they went with in the show. It made the cut on whichever episode that may have been, and Devin McCourty didn't like that. He was pretty upset, if you saw the whole interview, that they just felt like, disappointed because they all put in all this work. And it didn't really get into the values, the aspects that they thought were more valuable more than anything. And that leads me into this bigger topic, because a lot of people also shared some of those criticisms with this whole series. For the same reasons, really, they felt that it was more made to make Bill look bad, Bill Belichick, and make the organization, Robert Kraft, I don't want to say victims in the way that it all turned out with the Patriots and where they are now, but it surely made them look a little bit better or have no fault in whatever happened with this organization after Tom left and where they are now. It was more so almost putting the blame on Bill, and a lot of people might not think that's fair. A lot of people might share that sentiment, but the majority, from what I've seen in the criticism, didn't like how it was painting Bill Belichick in a negative way. One thing that I thought that I had no idea about, that Devin McCourty mentioned, he mentioned a story where Devin told a story to the locker room while they were playing, obviously, and Bill was in attendance in a team meeting or something like that, and he shared a story about this guy who has been in prison for 28 years, and that he was wrongfully convicted. And, he told a story how he should be free, how he wanted him to be out. And Bill Belichick was one of the first people to say, what can I do? What can I do to help? How can I influence people, or who do I have to talk to get this guy out if he is proven to be innocent? And he was proven to be innocent because it did happen. And, Devin went on to say that Bill wrote letters to the government or the Massachusetts governancy, and his voice, his influence holds a major part in Massachusetts. So with him on board, on top of, I'm sure, all the other players on board as well, they got him out. And they never really mentioned that in the docuseries at all. Devin, obviously, that's a crazy story for a coach to be taking part in that. And just going off of that as well with Bill Belichick and doing that now. I think it plays into how people view Bill Belichick now as well. He doesn't have a job right now, and he's arguably one of the best coaches in the entire history of the NFL. And I think, I'm not saying that docuseries is the reason he doesn't have a job, but that painting him in a negative light, the way things ended in New England with him getting dismissed, not coming back to the team, I think a lot of people would just put the blame on Bill Belichick. And to some aspect, I do think it's a little wrong just to do that, because I think this series missed a big chance to kind of reveal what kind of person Bill was and kind of make those negative connotations a bit more positive if they shared and focused on the kind of leader that Bill Belichick was, how much he played into the success of this organization, because that's what Rodney Harrison also harped on. He said that, obviously Bill wasn't the most friendly at times, wasn't the most rah guy. If you were to compare him to like a Mike Tomlin or something like that, or a Dan Campbell, he wasn't really like that, but he went on and concluded it all with saying, without a doubt, he wouldn't choose anybody else to have coached that team, and that it was more so to make him seem to be the one at fault for how it all went down, essentially, after all these years. And if you want to look at it from the other side of this whole docuseries, the more technical side, is there time available if you want to go through it? Because it is 20 years of stories. I don't think you'd have enough time, essentially is what I'm trying to say, in the 6 or 7 episodes that they had. Something had to be cut, and unfortunately it was that. Some people will be left with a bad taste in their mouth with how they talked about Bill Belichick, or if they don't share those same sentiments. But unfortunately, sometimes that is what people want to hear, the slander on Bill or Tom potentially in that series. I haven't had a chance to watch it, but sometimes, unfortunately, the slander and the bad stuff, the dirty news is what sells and what attracts people, and it is what people want to see. So that part is unfortunate, and it looks like these guys were left unsatisfied with how it turned out, and a lot of people did as well. I haven't had a chance to watch it, like I mentioned, but if all this is true and, it did turn out that way, I think it is unfortunate that it turned out like this, and people aren't really able to see all these other positive stories that I think this series on Apple TV had a chance to really enlighten people on, but they weren't able to do so. Focus more on the negative side of it and bad decisions that Bill Belichick took, and just run with that. So if you haven't had a chance to check it out, I'm sure it is interesting to still see, so make sure you go do that. I'm probably going to do that to really see what these two are talking about. But anyway, in saying that, I will wrap that segment up there, and I will leave it there and transition into the first break of the show. And when I come back, I will be talking about the comments RG3 made on Caleb Williams, suggesting and advising him to actually pull an Eli Manning back when he did it in 2004 and tell the Bears to not draft him. I'll tell you all the reasons why he said that, and if it does hold a bit of truth in the advice he's giving out to Caleb Williams. So all of that, plus a lot more stories to get into, coming up right here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh,
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Continuing on with the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, into the second segment of the show, and the comments that RG3 made recently at the start of this week on Caleb Williams and what he should do, what he felt that he should do. He went on, I think, Twitter or Instagram, either of the ones, and he had a pretty long rant about it, honestly. I think it was like 3 to 4 minute long video on the whole Justin Fields situation first, because he went on there on top of tweeting out how he felt about it. He said it was a robbery that the Steelers and Omar Khan, their general manager, robbed Ryan Poles and the Chicago Bears in broad daylight. And he felt a certain way about it. He felt that the Steelers basically gave away nothing for it. And that whole thing turned into what the topic is now in that video, where he suggested to Caleb Williams to really think about where and which team he's going to go with inevitably, because he is going to be drafted probably with the 1 or 2nd pick at the latest. And he really made him think about what his options should be, because of what the Chicago Bears had just done in their actions of just trading away Justin Fields for nothing. Because he actually said to pull in Eli Manning, and if you aren't aware, Eli Manning did that basically in 2004. Just days before the draft, Eli Manning's agent, Tom Condon, told the LA Chargers that Eli would not be playing at all, and he would actually sit out the whole season if the team drafted him first overall, which is what ended up happening. But they traded him, I think, less than an hour, just a little bit over an hour, that same night to the New York Giants. Later it came out that they didn't feel that that team, that situation would have made the most sense for Eli Manning. You could argue that that's fair, because it is his career. It is his life, essentially. So if he decides to feel like that, you can't blame him too much. But, these draft picks don't come around very often, to be drafted this high and then say, oh, I don't want to play for you. Your team doesn't really fit what I'm doing. I don't like what you guys have been doing. A lot of people will look at that and be like, be thinking, who does this kid think he is? It sounds arrogant to some extent as well. But Caleb Williams hasn't jumped or agreed with any of this. He's actually been the complete opposite and been very humble and modest about, if he gets drafted to the Bears or whoever, he'll be excited regardless, like most people do. But this just caught a lot of attention because in his rant, RG3 said, after everything with Justin Fields, can Caleb Williams really look at that and say, you know what, this organization has my best interest at heart, and they are going to help develop me into the player I want to become, which was one of the biggest points that Caleb made at the NFL Combine when he responded to all the questions at the media availability. He said one of the biggest things that he wanted to do was create a great legacy, going to an organization that develops him as a player, and it's all about winning, essentially. That's the biggest thing for him. He wants to win, and he wants to develop as a player and grow with the organization. It seemed the way he said it, that could be a deal breaker. And just based on the whole side that RG3 is taking against anti-Chicago Bears, I'm sort of leaning towards the opposite side, just because, I can see where RG3 is coming from. He would know what it is like to have a discombobulated relationship with a coach and organization. When he went and was drafted to the Washington Redskins at the time, now the Commanders, he was in as bad a situation as you could imagine. He had a great first year, won Rookie of the Year in 2012, and then he fell out. He fell out with Mike Shanahan, the coach at the time. He eventually got dismissed, and RG3 later said that, Mike Shanahan never wanted him on the team anyway. But when he did get fired, they brought in Jay Gruden, and the same thing basically happened with him. He didn't get along with Jay Gruden or his offensive idea philosophy as well. And he only ended up lasting 3 years in Washington, and he was never the same after that. Of course, he suffered that terrible knee injury as well. So that culminated with just a bad environment with the Washington Commanders. It didn't pan out for RG3, and you could see why he wouldn't want that for any other quarterback, especially the talent that Caleb Williams has. But where I start to drift away a little bit from RG3 and really evaluate what he was saying, Caleb hasn't given any indications of preference of a team, really. So that's the first thing. If you saw some indication of Caleb being unsure or preferring one team over another, you could be like, okay, this kind of makes sense. RG3 knows something potentially, just the way he's acting, but Caleb hasn't given any indication of that. And it does seem at times when Caleb does talk, the way it came off of at the NFL Combine, that some of his comments may have seemed a bit overly confident by not sharing his medicals or not working out there. It might have rubbed people the wrong way or caused them to look at it funny, but I think he's still very open, and just the way he has been portrayed elsewhere. I think all the team members that he's met with, all the scouts, have had glowing reviews about him as a person. He seems very go with the flow, very easygoing. So no one's really said anything bad about him to make you think that he would pull such an action like this. And comparing it back to Eli Manning, his agent communicated it with the team, the Los Angeles Chargers. But because Caleb doesn't have an agent, one, it would be very awkward and very groundbreaking if he went up to any of these teams and was like, I don't want to play with you, so don't even think about drafting me. If he went up and told them that, it would make news, unless he had his dad do it, which would even be worse or even more awkward if you think about it. But in terms of that, and in terms of the actual action that RG3 referenced with Justin Fields and how they just moved on from him, you look at that and you see it, you hear it, but it's not like they sent Justin away to some awful organization that is rebuilding and has no weapons, a bad offensive line. The biggest thing that the Bears and Ryan Poles wanted to do was look out for Justin Fields, because they almost acknowledged that they didn't do their best of reciprocating the effort or the energy that it requires to have a successful quarterback be drafted into your organization. And they accepted that. They knew that they failed in some aspect, and they wanted to make sure they did right by Justin Fields and sent him to a place where he could still develop and grow and have success in this league, which is where they ended up sending him to the Pittsburgh Steelers. They have a good young offense, a good coach, system that they're building over there, a great defense. So from that part, it doesn't really add up with how he's talking about Justin Fields in that light. And as well, you look at the two players and, you want to say that if you're RG3, this could happen to you basically down the line. If they did it with Justin Fields, why do you think it couldn't happen with you? The dichotomy there is, Justin wasn't drafted number 1 overall. People might view Caleb Williams as a better quarterback anyway. So from that aspect and saying that, trying to compare them in that way, it's not almost the same. It's not the same because they most likely won't be treated as they have been. Justin was middle of the first round, almost pick 11. So if you were talking about Trevor Lawrence and this happened to Trevor Lawrence, you could see it there because the Jaguars obviously invested a lot in him. But because you're talking about Justin Fields, the talent level might not be the same. So I think Caleb won't really receive that treatment with them because he is being drafted number 1 overall most likely. And to just throw away a number 1 overall pick just like that, I think it would look way worse for the Bears than it does for Caleb Williams. So that's one thing. And the final thing about it is he's getting drafted to a better team. So it's not like it will be the same situation with Justin where he has to carry the load and be responsible for everything that this team is required to have happen to have success. They brought in Keenan Allen. They brought in DeAndre Swift. They have DJ Moore. Cole Kmet is a very solid tight end. They're building this thing around Caleb Williams essentially because they've really made it no secret that they're interested in him heavily. They've always had meetings with him. They've taken him out to dinner, had long conversations with him. So you wouldn't do that if you weren't at least a little bit concerned with making sure he has success in this league. And that's really the difference with him and Justin Fields. Essentially, they're actually taking the right steps to make sure this young man comes into the best situation possible for him to have success. Because you also have to think about it. There's already this narrative around Ryan Poles missing out or deciding to miss out on C.J. Stroud, trading back out of the number 1 pick last year and giving it to the Carolina Panthers. And if this situation weren't to work, who do you think would be the first person out the door? Do you think they'd move on from Caleb Williams or Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus? It's clearly those two guys, so they have to make sure that this project does work, and it has to work for them because, or else they'd be out of a job. They'd have to look at other things, and then it all just resets after that, and they don't want that to happen. I'm sure, for the looks of it, from the outside looking in, it looks like Ryan Poles really is determined to improve this team and make it a competitive team in a wide-open NFC that I think is very intriguing, and there is an opportunity there because you look at the best team in that division. Is it the Lions? Yeah, but are they going to have a sort of hangover after the best season of their franchise? You look at the Packers. Was last season just a fluke-ish? Is Jordan Love really that quarterback that could carry this team going forward? Does he have the support, real support around him? There's questions there. You could have questions there. And, this is not wide open, but you see a little glimpse of hope there that if the Bears can figure it out with the quarterback, maybe they'll be in tough games, and if you're fortunate enough to have those fall your way, you could gain confidence from the fans and have even more support in what you're trying to build in this whole project that you're trying to build. And just the last thing I'll say to kind of close this segment out is that RG3 wants to mention, or did mention, them just moving on from Justin Fields, a player transaction. That doesn't seem so bad to me. What would seem worse to me would be if they decided to keep Justin Fields and they said they were trying to build a project around Justin Fields, but they were stingy with the money or they were hesitant to pay Justin Fields, and that was the reason why they didn't want to keep him. That would be more alarming to me than just deciding to move on from Justin Fields because they failed in some aspect. They didn't support him enough, so they decided it was best for him and the organization to move on. That doesn't seem as bad as the money aspect. They just don't want to pay him. That would seem more risky to me if I was Caleb Williams because, they're having a hesitancy to pay a top guy who has proven to have some glimpse of hope. And if you think that you're better than Justin Fields, there would still be that doubt that, are they going to repay me for putting in this much work and helping this team win? That would be more alarming to me. But the way that the Bears handled it, I thought it was best for everybody and how it ended out. Everyone's always going to go back to the 6th-round pick. Oh, they got nothing for him. But the way the market fell out and the way it was looking, the Bears took a decision. They have to live with it now. And, it's funny when you look at this just in hindsight. If Caleb Williams plays great and this team is really good, exciting this coming season, no one's going to remember who traded for Justin Fields and what they gave up for. If he has great success, that's awesome with the Steelers. I'm hopeful of that, hopefully, because I'm a Steelers fan. But no one's going to remember what they traded for Justin Fields if Caleb's amazing, outstanding, can live up to his full potential. This is just going to go under the rug. And if he plays great, there's no reason why the Bears would move on from him anyway. So I think it was a bit overblown the way RG3 is and very animated. I'm a fan of RG3, but maybe this take was a little bit very emotional from RG3. So I wanted to react to it. It happened at the beginning of the week, and I just didn't have time to talk about it. But that's where I'm at with this whole issue, I guess, of telling the Bears not to draft you. He'll end up there most likely anyway. So moving on from that topic, I will be going more into another prospect in this draft, Marvin Harrison, and him taking the unprecedented decision to not work out at his pro day, already skipped the combine now. He hasn't really been in action in front of people really this whole offseason since Ohio State last played. I'm going to get into that, as well as Stephen Jones giving his reasons why the Cowboys have been so laid back and not really being too active in the free agent market. So stick around. You're not going to want to miss all those stories coming up right here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to get into the second half of the show. Now talking about Marvin Harrison and the topic around his pro day not deciding to work out there for the scouts. And I had a very interesting take, or just the interesting perspective to take on all of this. But before I do that, I want to remind you guys one last time in this show, again, if you have any questions, comments, or just quotes that you want to say, to use the tip and donations link at gsmcpodcast.net. I'm able to see your question a lot easier. It pops up right away here on the list here to my right. So that makes it a lot more helpful. And it's always a big help for the show if you guys are able to donate and use that link. Again, the link is gsmcpodcast.net. It makes it more fun, and we always appreciate it a lot every time you guys are able to do that. But going back to Marvin Harrison and talking about his decision not to work out at the pro day, a lot of people that I've talked to or that I've seen react to this, might think it's not too much of a big deal. And I can see that point. I can see where they're coming from with him not doing that. But at least I haven't seen too many people skip out on the combine. If you do skip out on the combine, you most likely are just saving, I guess, yourself for your pro day to really go all out at your pro day. There's always that risk of injury, I guess, but, no one's thinking about getting injured, or you could get injured whenever, realistically, if you want to be so literal about it. But he decided not to work out at his pro day, and that was yesterday. And it actually turned out being one of the most empty, or potentially the most empty Ohio State pro day has ever been. For a long time, because they're always producing some of the best talent out of there, specifically wide receivers. But because Marvin wasn't working out, and because some of their talent, most of their talent, decided to stay in school, a lot of people did not go to this pro day. Alabama also had their pro day yesterday, as well as Texas, and you got guys like Dallas Turner, Xavier Worthy, A.D. Mitchell, Byron Murphy, J.C. Latham working out on those. So, all these scouts would love to be everywhere. And if one player has decided not to work out, then, they have no issue going with all these other schools that have a lot of great talent as well. And it also was reported that early yesterday morning that there was actually no GMs or head coaches scheduled to even be in Columbus, Ohio at that pro day. There still is talent. I know there's still players that worked out there, but as far as when I wrote down these notes and when I saw the report, there was no team scheduled to be there. So that just adds on even more to it, I think, for a reason I'll get into a little bit later. But just to kind of lay it out for you a little bit more, according to Albert Breer of Sports Illustrated, Harrison asked at the NFL Combine, he asked the 9 teams that he did meet with whether or not they needed to see anything else from him at his pro day. And each of the responses from those teams said, no, like, you're good. We've seen enough on tape and just following you all over from the season. So he decided, if they're fine with it, he believes that he's not getting drafted outside of these 9 teams. So he just decided to skip out on his pro day and continue his own training in Columbus, Ohio. And that, I guess, it does work out because he is so highly touted. He is so skilled, and he is a great player. Don't get me wrong. Probably the best receiver in this draft. And a lot of people will just say, he's that good. Go back and look at his numbers. In the 3 seasons that Ohio State had, or that he played there, he had 155 receptions, over 2,600 yards, 31 touchdowns, and recorded the most receiving yards, over 2,400, and 28 receiving touchdowns in a 2-year span, which is the most in a 2-year span in Ohio State history. No player had more touchdowns than him over the past 2 years. So he is an absolute stud, a monster at wide receiver. I want to stress that and preface that. But where I'm coming from is that it's already starting to become more of a trend to not be at the Combine. Malik Neighbors didn't work out there. Jaden Daniels didn't work out there. Rome Odunze, I don't think, caught passes there or didn't do any of the wide receiver-specific drills. But if you want to look at the direct competition with Odunze, Neighbors, Brian Thomas, if you want to throw him in there, you look at those guys, I'm almost certain that those guys are going to be participating at their pro day. And Malik Neighbors wasn't at the Combine, like I mentioned, but he will be at least putting something out there for scouts, GMs, and stuff like that to kind of put that in, plant that seed in their mind and show them, if there was any slim doubt that they had about him, if there was any questions, to make sure that they answered it at their pro day to have the best chance to be drafted higher in the first round. I'm not saying Marvin Harrison's going to drop now because of that. He is so talented that kind of allows him to not participate at the pro day or take these decisions. I talked about it yesterday with Kenneth a little bit, Kenneth Grunfelder from the GSMC Football Podcast. I had him on as a guest, and we talked about it a little bit. He also shared the same sentiment. It's not really too much of a big deal to not really look too much into it, but just the thing that I can't really wrap my head around too much is that if Marvin Harrison wants to be the first wide receiver drafted, if he truly cares about that, he might not care where he goes, but if he does care how high he goes, and if it is important to him that he is drafted first, he's the first wide receiver off the board, you have now more draft analysts like Daniel Jeremiah, Dan Brugler from The Athletic, and Todd McShay, who all come out, and they're more prominent during this time of the year, right? You always see one of these guys probably at least on social media or on their TV shows, on their networks, saying, who's your best wide receiver? Who's your top running back? Why is that? And all 3 of them have Malik Neighbors as their top prospect. And you couple that with him performing at his pro day coming up. I'm pretty sure it's next week. He's scheduled to work out there, and you have all these guys already hyping him up even more. Recency bias is a real thing, guys. I think it is a real thing, and I think it's more of a real thing more than ever in sports. If just looking at guys and players, I think the most common thing that you would hear in any sport, NBA, NFL, soccer, whatever you want to think about, you look at a guy, he performs very well, you're thinking, oh, he's going to be great. You always hear guys saying, oh, they're one of the best already, this young talent coming out, he's great, he's amazing 1 year, and then he drops a little bit, and, oh, he's the worst wide receiver. I don't know what they did drafting him. They made such a bad decision of thinking that he was the guy after just 1 year, when just the last year they were going on about how good he is. And I think, that's probably the most common thing you see in sports. There's no loyalty in sports from fans, teams, or whatever you want to say, but that's very common, and getting more reassurance that this guy is really the guy, I think, plays a big part, and it's something that a lot of people don't really bring up with draft picks, especially if you want to be drafted higher, if you want more teams vying for your skill set and wanting you to be on your team, putting more tape out there and showing them why you deserve to be that draft pick and drafted first overall, I think could only help you. But Marvin Harrison has decided not to do that. And again, I'll reiterate, if he doesn't care where he's drafted, then this just makes sense. It just goes on. But if he really wants to be and assure that he is that first wide receiver drafted, I think this would have only helped him to do that. He doesn't have to go. I mean, at pro days, I don't know how 100% they go on these drills, but he didn't have to run too crazy of a route tree or of a workout. He could have caught some passes at least, and I think that would have been something already. I think people would have gravitated towards him even more. But, he decided to sit out, and whether he does that or not, if I were a GM, would this sway me a little bit? Just the way I'm talking about it? Probably, yeah, it probably would. Because, admittedly, I am one of those fans that think something one time and might think something else a completely different time, just based on result and that recency bias that I want to stress. It might not seem like a real thing. A lot of people don't even think that they're doing it, but it is so common in sports from fans that love a guy one time, and all it takes is for Saquon to go to the Eagles, right? And now everybody hates him. He's the worst. They don't remember the success that they brought him. So it is really, unfortunately, you could say, a league, a sport where, it's all about what have you done for me lately. I think that's a major thing, a lot in terms of guys getting paid and getting drafted and stuff like that. I think that stuff matters more than people want to give it its due diligence. But, that's just me. It could sway me a little bit, but, the way this draft is laid out with the Arizona Cardinals picking at 4, they could use a receiver or they could trade back as well. Then you have the Chargers. Do they also seem like they need a receiver desperately now because they got rid of all of their weapons? And then you have the Giants as well. So it could go Harrison, Neighbors, Odunze, or if this does sway people, Marvin could fall only a spot or two, and it's not the end of the world, right? Obviously, but I just thought that it was very unconventional for him to do it. You always just see a guy miss out one aspect of the offseason, usually the combine, but he decided to just not go to both. That's his decision. It just could be nothing as well, but really I wanted to stress that recency bias and that sort of idea that, this stuff doesn't really matter if you're that good. It actually, you would be surprised at how many people it does affect, just getting the idea of them and how good you are most recently to them. I truly believe that it does make a difference. But, it's done. It's already passed. We're on Thursday now. That was supposed to happen yesterday. So we're going to move on. I still expect him to be a great receiver. He's going to get drafted high anyways, but that just was something interesting that caught my eye yesterday. And in saying that, I will leave it there, and I will go into the last break of the show. And on the other side, we're going to get back into talking about the good old Dallas Cowboys. Stephen Jones had some more interesting things to say about their offseason and why really is the big reason they haven't been so active this free agent market. So I'm going to get into that, telling you what he said and giving you my feedback on what I think about all of that. So all that's coming up next. Don't go anywhere. You're not going to want to miss it.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Back here for the last part of today's episode. Thank you for still being with me here on the last segment of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Now talking about the Dallas Cowboys and their situation in free agency. You know, everyone wants to know, when are they going to drop a massive signing? When are we going to get notified of the new superstar that's going to be in Dallas? And before I wrote this whole segment, before I learned more about it, I was probably in that same boat, thinking that, you know, it's the Cowboys, they have to do something. They've lost so many players, important players to them on both sides of the ball. And I don't want to just keep harping on the same idea, but Jerry Jones did say he was going to be all in. That was the mantra. That was the saying that's going to be pasted on every billboard, going to be the headline of every story going forward with whatever the Dallas Cowboys do. So I'm still waiting to see a big move, but Stephen Jones recently has said that it could go the opposite way. Still no movement from them. The only person that they have brought in is Eric Kendricks from the Los Angeles Chargers, but he, it doesn't really move the needle for a lot of people. It doesn't really get a lot of people excited. He is needed. I think they definitely need a middle linebacker, but in terms of drawing eyes into this Dallas Cowboys team, it doesn't move the needle that way. And to just kind of back up the Cowboys a little bit, they also don't have a lot of cap space. The growing frustration from the media and the fans doesn't help for them to make a decision, but the cap space and all that stuff, that's sort of, their fault. By giving, some contracts to some people that you could argue didn't deserve it. If you want to look at the contracts that they have now on their roster, they've spent the contract that they have with Dak Prescott, the current contract that he's on. Brandon Cooks is getting paid almost $20 million for the two-year deal that he's on. Michael Gallup, also, he's not even on the team anymore, but he was on a 5-year, $57 million contract, and he's not on the team anymore. Like I mentioned, Dak was making about $45 million per year, which isn't in the top 10 now, obviously, after a bunch of these deals are getting made. But at one point, he was up there with the league leaders in how much money they made on average per year. So if they want to say salary cap is the reason, that isn't something you could say to be like, that we feel bad for you now. It's more so that that's their own fault for managing it like that, giving out these contracts to players that you could argue might not deserve it, other than Dak, because he is your quarterback. But that's one thing you could say. But what Stephen Jones said, their COO, he said basically that the market at the beginning of it all is basically inflated. It's an inflated market at the beginning, and that's really the main reason why they weren't so active like the Steelers, the Eagles, the Commanders early on in free agency, because teams tend to overspend, in his opinion, early on in the market. And he said, I've always been of the ilk that in the first couple of days of free agency, you pay good players like they're great, you pay average players like they're good, and so on and so forth. Because the market is inflated, in our mind, that's one opinion. He said that, basically it does make sense when you think about it. Early on, people will overspend to make sure they get a Christian Wilkins on their team, they get a Saquon on their team, they get a Kirk Cousins on their team. All guys that you could have argued that the negative was, they overspent for Kirk Cousins. Is he worth $180 million or whatever he got, $100 million guaranteed. Is he worth that at 35 years old, coming off of a bad injury? Does Saquon as a running back deserve $12 million nearly per year, and so on and so forth? Did the Raiders overpay for Christian Wilkins just to get him on their team? Maybe you could argue that, but for me, the counter to that, and I think the winning argument to that is they're trying to win. They're trying to do something. They're showing everybody that they want to be proactive. They want to be active in trying to improve this team. And if they have to overspend a little now, they're willing to do it because it is all about improving and not staying the same, which is where I think this whole argument really doesn't make sense for Stephen Jones and the Cowboys, because his solution to not being active is that they've had success in the past draft with getting some starters and finding great talent in the draft. And again, that's a good point at the beginning of it. They've drafted guys like Oza Odigizua, Tyler Smith, Jake Ferguson in the 4th round, Deron Bland in the 5th round, who had a great year last year, Mazzie Smith in the 1st round last year from Michigan, and obviously they drafted Micah Parsons, CeeDee Lamb, and Dak Prescott late as their franchise quarterback. That's fine, tooting your own horn there a little bit, and the prospects that you were able to get and scout and do a good job of finding, that's all great, but you have all those guys on your team, and you haven't had a different outcome than you have in like the last 25 years or 20 years or whatever the time period is. You basically stayed the same for that amount of time, and your solution is still doing the same thing that you have been doing. Yeah, you might do it well, but if you ask anybody, relying on the draft so much to think that every round you're just going to replace all the guys that they've lost, one, there's not enough draft picks for them to do that because they've lost so many players in free agency, and it's such a crapshoot. You look at some of the past draft classes with just the quarterbacks, how there's only 2 from 2021 and 2022. There's only 2 starting quarterbacks that still remain on their same team, and all the other, I think 10 or more than 10 quarterbacks that were drafted are somewhere else, or some of them aren't even playing in the NFL. And some of these general managers, some of these scouts would have sworn by these quarterbacks and drafting them and thinking they were going to be their next franchise guy. And you don't really know, which is the solid truth, the bottom line truth. You don't know how these guys are going to pan out. And for Stephen Jones to say that he's going to rely on this so much, I think is a little naive by them to just think they're just going to keep finding these draft prospects in the draft and draft starters, draft Pro Bowlers. I don't think that's the way to go. I think, at least for me, I need to be more reassured of the kind of guy, the kind of player that I'm getting, which is what free agency is there for. You have an opportunity to get an All-Pro, a Pro Bowler, a proven starter in this league, and you hesitate to do that because you don't want to spend money, or you just think that it's going to be cheaper to draft guys, which it is. Obviously, on rookie contracts, you're going to save some money there. But I just don't share the same idea of only relying on that, because the biggest thing with the Cowboys is, they get to the playoffs and they fold. They get to the playoffs and they fold. They don't have the guys that step up. Everyone wants to ask where Micah Parsons was in the biggest moments, or CeeDee Lamb, or why Dak Prescott disappoints in the playoffs every year. It's because they have these habits of they just refuse to change anything about them. And you could relate this back to the culture and stuff like that. This is the kind of organization and kind of thinking that Jerry Jones runs in Dallas. He loves the attention. That's the biggest thing for him. He wants the Cowboys brand to grow more than ever, and the results on the field are secondary to that. Of course, they're never going to admit it. Some people will argue that till the death, but the actions obviously speak louder than the words, and with them just sitting back and thinking, we're just going to do the same thing as we always do in something that's so unstable and so just you don't really know what's going to happen with the draft, to rely on only that and expect something else to happen differently in the playoffs, I think that's where you kind of lose me. If you're Stephen Jones and you're saying that and still expect and just harp on this idea that, oh, you want to be good in the playoffs, you want to see the Cowboys go further. If you keep doing the same thing, how long are people going to believe you? How long are you just going to keep saying it before people just, start to give up on this whole idea that you're building? A lot of people, it just goes back to when they lost to the Packers. A lot of people wanted to see that change. People were striving for that change, but they stayed the same. They kept Mike McCarthy. They kept Dak Prescott. And now Stephen Jones is saying, getting into next season, what we're going to do the same thing we've always done, rely on the draft, and hope that we get Pro Bowlers, starters from there to replace all the tons of guys that they've left. I'm not of that mindset. It's not really what I think they need. I think they need a drastic change, but they failed to do that with bringing back Dak Prescott and Mike McCarthy. They could have brought back Dak because, I understand that finding a quarterback is probably the hardest thing to do if you're ready to win, but you just need the quarterback. I understand that, but I just thought Mike McCarthy needed to go. If anything at all, I thought you needed to bring in a new leader, a new voice in there. They failed to do that, and now, it's almost the same thing as always with the Cowboys. I wouldn't be surprised if you saw these teams that were more active in free agency, the Commanders, the Jaguars, the Eagles, the Steelers, the Jets, if all of them have a better record, one, I wouldn't be surprised. And if people are surprised, I would ask, did you expect anything different from the teams that went out and got better players, looked for better talent? Are you so surprised that they are better than the team that didn't do anything all free agency and is relying on inexperienced college players, regardless of how good they are? They've never played and they need to learn how to play in the NFL. Are you really surprised that the teams that went out and bought players, added to their team right away, are better than the team that sat around and did nothing? That rhetorical question answers it in itself. And the Cowboys just keep giving me these things, saying these things, and I'm just like, all right, that's fine, I guess, if you're doing that. I expected more because the biggest thing for me with the Cowboys is they have great players. I want to see them do good. I really do want to see them play better in the playoffs, but it's getting to a point now where they just keep saying all the wrong things, the complete opposite of what fans and people want to see them do. And it just makes you hunch over and think, all right, we're just going to get the same thing. They're just continuing to build this narrative. And it's unfortunate, but until that changes, I don't think this team could really go anywhere different or produce anything else that we've already seen just recently. They still have other players to try and keep. Dak, obviously, with his salary. They have a negotiation coming up with CeeDee Lamb. They could pick up the fifth-year option from Micah Parsons, but he's going to eventually need a deal. They're putting this off and thinking that this team's going to be really good forever. It's just not the case, really, in the NFL. Teams always change, and you always lose players, bring in new players, hopefully. And I think they're just spending too much of their time right now thinking that they're going to be good forever, which will, unfortunately, not be the case for the Cowboys. So hopefully they do something. I hope they do, just to see them improve. They have too many good players not to. That's where I stand on it. Disappointed of what Stephen Jones said, but, same old Cowboys, I guess, right? But that's where I'll leave that topic on the Cowboys and where this show will meet its end. That will do it for for today's episode. A reminder to please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Make sure to also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, X, and Twitter and TikTok for more of the network's content outside of just sports. And if you want to see more of me and this show in particular, make sure to check out the GSMC Sports channel, Sports Network channel, and the GSMC Podcast Network channel for more more content around this show. There's YouTube Shorts that I post on there daily, every weekday. There's all the recorded live shows that I've done if you want to rewatch a whole show or catch up on one that you missed, as well as individual segment videos in case you did tune in and missed one segment or want to go back and rewatch one of the segments in particular. It's all on there on both channels. Again, I remind you guys to tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more conversations around football and the league of the NFL with me as your host, Manny Maradiegue. Thanking you guys, as always, for tuning in, and I would love to see you guys all back here again tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn it.